All right, we are here for another episode of Millennial Money Matters with Kelly and Derek. Hi, Derek. How you doing?
Hey, Kelly. I'm doing great. How are you?
I am good. I am good. We were joking as we came in here that Derek's son and my son do karate together.
Yep.
And I asked if his wife saw my son being savage last night. I feel like it's that time of year. It's that time of year. So, yeah, he was like not having it.
Well, yeah, they got a lot of things going on. Like school's starting to get real for them.
Yeah.
They actually have like homework now.
First grade is no joke.
Yeah. You got stuff to do, and they're like, hey, you know what? I'm not doing this anymore, so I'm gonna make a big scene. And no judgment on our end though. So Nicole's like, yeah, that happened, but like it just makes us feel like, okay, we're not the only ones.
No, it was like a moment. The upside for me was I got to leave because Corey, my husband, showed up, and I got to go home. So I was like, bye.
Your
he's all
problem.
yours. I'm gonna leave.
See ya.
Speaking of husbands, what are we talking about today?
We're gonna talk about couples and finance. It's a common thread that we have with people. People come from different backgrounds. I've noticed very much so that your family life growing up really impacts how you are financially. And now we're combining two sets of families essentially, and kind of how that works. So we're going to talk about families and finance.
Yeah, and it can feel very stressful as you sort of get really serious with somebody who you're dating, how to like have money conversations. Because this goes back to episode 1 of millennials are taught that financial conversations are taboo, that you are not supposed to talk about people's money, to the point where it always amazes me in the mortgage process that I will get people applying for a mortgage. They may be married, they may be engaged. They don't even know how much the other person makes.
Which is crazy to me. I mean, knowing what I do, but it's just crazy that you wouldn't have that conversation with your significant other, your spouse, whatever it is. But it's important. It's important to kind of go through and talk about, hey, how do you feel about money? How do you handle money? Do you have any debts? Because most millennials have at least some student loan debt on top of that. Right?
Yeah, as we've talked about in a previous episode, student loan debt can be big. It can be big dollars. And I think a lot of it comes from embarrassment, right? There's so much shame around debt that we feel shameful about it. And we feel like it's some sort of moral failing on our part, that if I have credit card debt, if I have student loans, if I have a car loan, I have somehow failed at adulting. And we don't want to admit that to the person who we love and we want to love us.
Well, you want to seem perfect for that person, right, at the end of the day, which no one is.
Right.
Spoiler alert. But yeah, it's important to have that conversation, because if you don't, we run into a lot of issues.
Yeah,
So,
and it's funny, having this conversation, I think back to like wedding planning. And if you have not had financial conversations prior to getting engaged, you got problems.
yeah, you're gonna have issues, because people will handle money differently. There's gonna be, typically at every couple I've seen, there's usually one that's the main driver of the financial acumen, whatever it is.
I'm making air quotes, the money person.
The money person. Yeah, there's always one money person. One was like, oh, this person's got it. Cool.
I'm good. I'm good. The problem is sometimes that money person shouldn't be the person in charge of your money. And it's funny on my end, I see that a lot with sometimes men are just designated as the role of the money person. Mm-hmm. And I occasionally see that in the mortgage process where like the dude, like, oh, my husband takes care of that. And then I like look and I'm like, your husband is terrible at finances, but you're actually pretty good at it. So why did you leave them in charge of that?
Yeah, that's always an interesting dynamic I found, but it probably comes from just lack of communication. I think that's one of the things we're going to talk about today is, right, well, what should we be talking about? What are the important things? Like, how do we set things up? Like, what are the stages you should be talking about things? Like, so pre-marriage, what are we talking about? Post-marriage, what are the kind of checkpoints? So, I don't know. Do you want to start about some of our pre-marriage items?
Yeah, I would tell you, and again, I think this happens before you've hit the point of getting engaged. So when you are in the seriously dating phase, you should be having conversations, number one, about how much income you are earning. Okay. How much income you're earning, what type of income you're earning. Are you salary? Are you commission? Are you hourly? Because that can help set expectations of what your sort of monthly finances and budget look like. The other piece to that is, what is sort of your future earnings goal? Right? Is you should be having those conversations ahead of time. Are you looking to, grow in your position? Are you looking to switch jobs? Are you looking to be a stay-at-home partner or spouse? What are your financial expectations as far as your job? And to try to get from your spouse or partner, what are their expectations of you? So I think that's number one. Number two is the big one. What is your debt?
Yeah.
What do you owe people? And I think that, Derek, like, correct me if I'm wrong, from a sort of a retirement standpoint, right? How much you owe at the beginning of your career has a direct impact on how much you have at the end.
Yeah, because essentially you're just taking resources away from one spot where like, all right, now I've got to pay $500 to service this debt a month versus I can put $500 a month towards my Roth IRA or something, for example.
Absolutely. And what kind of debt should you be talking about with your partner or spouse? Absolutely obligated debt, right? So credit cards, car loans, student loans, personal loans, anything like that.
Even if you have a mortgage prior to getting together, that's also something that has.
What are the and I would really recommend like sitting down and putting all this stuff out on paper, right? What is all the debt? What's the monthly payments? What's your interest rates, right? Because as you combine into a family unit, this debt becomes both of yours.
Right.
And everybody has to be aware of it. And then I think the other piece to it is just general spending habits, right? What are you spending your money on? And does that align? Just because your spending habits are different than somebody else's doesn't mean they're wrong, but it can cause a lot of friction in relationships if you have different expectations of how you spend your money.
Well, especially if one person's a saver and one person's a spender, you really got to kind of figure that out and figure out, okay, well, how do we rein in the spender, and maybe the saver is probably a little bit too much of a saver too. So you want to really have that balance there, and it's good to have that conversation ahead of time versus like that person's like, why are you spending that on blah blah blah, because that does not help anyone.
No, and I think why do I say you have to do this before you're engaged? Because I think the engagement ring, your expectations around engagement rings and or wedding planning can really, if you have not already solidified those conversations, they're gonna come out when you're talking about rings and weddings, like full stop.
Those are huge expenses, and that is actually going to be your probably first real window, especially the wedding planning piece of it. Because you're going to find out what that person's like. Oh, am I going to do this because I want to have the best wedding? I don't care what it costs. Or are you hey, I've got it. Like, what are we doing? How many flowers? Let's go from 3 to 2 flowers in the bouquet. Or like, let's.
Yeah, what's the budget? Yeah. Can I stick to it? Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important. And I also think it is normal to have kind of the yin and yang in a couple, right? Where there is that saver and spender. It's rare that you're going to get 2 savers. It's not great if you're going to get 2 spenders. That's traumatic for you.
That's a tough one.
But I think Derek said at the beginning, a lot of this does come from your family. It's the sort of, thoughts and conversations that you had around money and the anxieties you had around money growing up have a direct impact to how you spend money as an adult.
I mean, it's an important question. I typically ask my clients, like, how did you grow up with money? What's something your parents did that you guys are really proud of that comes with money, or that you learned that you're like glad they taught you that? And what's something that you've done that you would never do? Right. So like, what's a lesson you've learned? And I think it's good having those conversations because, person A may grow up in a totally different environment than another person. And, you're going to have those clash of ideals and values. And you want to make sure, more importantly, you're really the same on the values side of it.
Absolutely. And I think, as you are moving towards getting married, right? So first you have the big expense of the wedding. Then at the wedding, theoretically, you're going to get the first big chunk of change that you may have seen because you're going to get the wedding gifts.
Yep.
And I think same thing, that kind of chunk of money can tell a lot about what your ideals around money are. Are you going to put that money away? Is that your down payment for a house? Is that to pay off the expenses from your wedding? Because gone are the days where our parents are generally paying for weddings, right? Usually couples are self-funding them at this point. You kind of got to pay the bills back. Are you having a wedding counting on money from gifts to pay it back, or did you already have the money to begin with? Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of issues can come to a head sort of during that phase of your relationship.
Yeah, that's like the first real big test. And then why don't we talk about, all right, now we're a married couple. What should we really talk about?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is, how do you split up your money? Is it all's fair in love and war? My money is my money, your money's your money. You pay your bills, I pay mine. Are you splitting your bills 50-50? I have friends who one makes, $150,000, one makes $50,000, but all the bills are 50-50. So one person's got lots of money left, one person has little. There are a lot of couples that split it by percentage of income brought into the household. Mm-hmm. I make 75% of the money, so I pay 75% of the bills. And then there's probably the more relaxed types that are just like, this is roughly how much we make. I pay these bills, you pay these bills. If we run into trouble, let's talk about it. And I fall into that category.
Yeah, same here with that one. But I will say this, because that's one of the big conversations I have with couples that kind of recently get married. And the question's like, well, what's the best thing to do? And I think the thing that you're going to follow that works for both of you is always going to be the best thing, whether that's the percentage, whether that's the, hey, well, loosey-goosey, or the, hey, we need to have X amount going every single month based on percentages. But what I would really do is kind of first step back and do the budget, right?
Yeah.
Figure and block it out into, all right, what are our fixed expenses? So think like the mortgage, what's our rent, what's our insurances every month? What are the things that are coming in every single month that we know we need to pay for, and write all those down. And then how much do we typically spend on the fun stuff? So that's usually what's going to go on the credit card, right? Your nights out, your dinners, gifts for folks, you name it, random things that pop up. You want to have those written down and then kind of figure out, okay, what would work for us and what works for us as a couple, whether that's you doing percentages. I mean, I see the most common thing I see financial advisors kind of advise on is saying, why do you create 3 buckets? So one bank account is going to be the checking, that's the revolving. We're going to do all the fixed stuff in there. And then the other 2 are the discretionary stuff where the variable expenses will be paid out of. And then essentially anything left over is kind of whatever you have based on your income and all
and what
that.
your needs are at that moment.
Right. So that can really definitely work if you're the couple that needs that structure. If you know you're not the couple that needs a structure, I mean, I find percentages tend to work pretty well because, the person making 150 versus 50 doesn't feel like some resentment there. The person making 50 that's like, hey, I have nothing at the end of every month and you're going out and buying all these cool toys and I've got literally nothing. And can we just maybe shift this a little bit? Right. So that's kind of where you want to be as a couple, where everyone feels like they're contributing, but they don't feel like they're being taken advantage of either.
Absolutely. And I think the other piece to that too is really, and it's why you have to have that income conversation early, is also taking into consideration how people get paid. Is it variable income? So I'm a commission-based person. So my income varies wildly month to month. My husband is self-employed. So we can't necessarily split things in a percentage, right? So we kind of have to have a monthly conversation about like, what do you got coming in? What do I got coming in? Where do we got to put it? What does that look like? Those conversations look very different now than they did 10 years ago. When 10 years ago, it was like, we need exactly this much money to make this happen. But I think, being really open and honest is probably like the overarching theme here, is that especially when you're first setting up financial expectations with your partner, honesty is the best policy.
Yeah, everyone says, marriage is all about communication. That goes for the money piece of this, right? You need to talk about it. And if you're not feeling like, hey, I'm contributing enough, or you're feeling like, hey, I feel like I'm just stressed every month, I have nothing, but I see you doing all this fun stuff, you need to talk about that. And it should be okay to talk about that. And if it's not okay, that might be a red flag in general.
Absolutely.
But it's let's be real here. But it should feel like you're both comfortable with whatever situation you decide, and you feel like you're both contributing, and you feel like you could still have some of your own personal money to deal with. Because I've always seen issues with families or couples where, hey, it's one person's doing everything and the other person says, hey, you can't do that, or putting it up. That's not a good environment to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other piece to that is, what is the recommendation? Should you have joint accounts, separate accounts, And I think that piece is really dependent on you and your personalities and on your situation. My husband and I have big jokes. I have access to all his bank accounts. He does not have access to mine. But we lived a life where for a while in my career, I don't want to say my money was inconsequential, but I paid for like incidentals, groceries, Target runs, that stuff, where he was kind of paying the bills. That's not the same anymore. But now it's just a matter of I have to like drag us both to the bank at the same time to get them added, and like who has time for that? But we trust each other completely. So it's not a big deal. Where I think that comes into play is if you can't trust your partner or spouse with their funds and you have to be on the account for that, you've got like other things to deal with than just who's on the account.
Yeah, but I do think there's a bit of a trust but verify kind of situation. Yeah. I think because we've seen too many issues where X person in the couple is handling the bill, right? And that bill doesn't get paid. Mm-hmm. And then maybe it's a gambling thing, or maybe it's a whatever. And you just want to make sure that you have ability to double check and make sure the bills are getting paid, if you totally trust that person. Because, inevitably finances can get a little funky depending on your relationship or depending on their situation. And they're not, if things are going really bad, they probably won't tell you about it.
Correct. Well, and I will tell you, as part of the mortgage process, I am the uncoverer of that a lot of times for people, both in married couples and unmarried couples. So I'm the starter of uncomfortable conversations for a lot of unmarried couples where they are like, we're going to buy a house together. And then I'm like, okay, cool. Fill out this application. I'm going to pull your credit. And then we like have a call or we meet in person. And I have to tell them like, hey, you've got wage garnishments for unpaid taxes, and the partner's like, you what? Or, you've got 4 lates on a credit card and 2 lates on your car loan. What? Excuse me? You paid that bill late? And it can be deeply uncomfortable for everybody, especially the mortgage lady who's like, okay, I'm going to hang up on the Zoom and please complete your conversation on your own. But financial infidelity is like a real thing. It's a real thing. It happens. It's one of the number one causes of divorce is financial infidelity. So I also, though, while there are spouses that take advantage, there's also a lot of spouses on the other side who are equally as guilty because they put their heads in the sand and say, I just don't want to know.
Yeah, I can't recommend that enough because you don't want to be the person that never knows. Because what if, God forbid, something happens to them, the person passes away, or they get really sick, and now you have to handle everything, but you have no idea where anything is. You have no idea what the bills are. You really have to be on top of at least knowing, okay, if XYZ hits the fan, this is what we're doing, and this is how I kind of get in there and say, okay, I can run the ship while you're out or whatever.
Absolutely. And I think, again, just good practices, starting those conversations early, right? As early as you can, make it normal. As far as credit is concerned, everyone can do a free credit pull every year, or you can sign up for a credit monitoring service. Again, does everybody need to be doing that? No, but maybe if you have a partner who has a history of paying bills late or has struggled in the past, it may behoove you to sign up for things like credit monitoring so everybody is kind of always on the same page.
Yeah, and that's actually a little bit of where some of the planning can come into too, because maybe it's like, okay, we want to buy this house, but do we both have to buy it right now?
Yeah.
Like you could both be on a title actually and have one person be on the mortgage. That is a thing.
Yep.
You can buy a car that way, right? So it's in someone else's name that has the better credit versus you doing it jointly. So those are some decisions you want to make. And even something like with student loans, I know we mentioned this last episode, but with married filing jointly versus married filing single, that can really impact if you're on a payment plan, right? So you want to have some of these conversations about what the debt they have, because that can impact what you're doing, depending on where you are with everything. So it's really important to talk about this stuff and really think about, okay, we do have these things. How do we lay them out and do this most effectively?
Absolutely. Now, what do you do? What's your thoughts on, you have that saver and that spender, right? And the spender's like, let's plan the bombastic vacation. And, I'm a Disney adult. We're going to Disney World. And the saver maybe says this doesn't fit into our financial plan. Is that where getting professionals kind of involved to have the buckets of money, right? My fixed expenses, my savings, and my fund money can really help?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's just maybe putting guardrails that, the saver doesn't feel are too tight or too loose, right? And then the spender doesn't feel like, oh my God, I can't do anything ever. One of the things I'm a really big fan of is doing the reverse budgeting, where you're budgeting for the goals first and then you're kind of free to spend after that. So, and then the things I would build in there, like I typically for every client build in a vacation goal, because not everyone I know wants to go on vacation.
Yeah.
So say, okay, what vacation do you want to do this year? Do you want to go big? Do you want to go small? Is this like, we'll do it every 3 years, we'll do a big one? So you just want to figure out what's the right fit for the client. But talking about making sure you're hitting all your goals first is the most important thing, because if you're spending and you're not on track for retirement, that saver's gonna be so mad.
Absolutely.
Right? But if you are on track, that saver's gonna be like, okay, well, at least I know we're on track. I probably have a little anxiety still, but at least I know we're on track.
Well, I think the other piece of that too is the thought of, those childhood sort of lessons that we talked about. Like, it's things like vacations where those come to a head. It's things like planning for the special events where I think a lot of your feelings from how you were raised really come out. I'll use myself as an example. So I grew up with fairly frugal parents. There wasn't necessarily a lot of money. We did not walk into stores and get toys or here's a candy. Like, everything was very well planned. My parents were great with money, but it was very exacting. I struggle sometimes with the you only live once. Here you go. We're at Target. Here you go. And I can see myself doing it. And I will 100% tell you that is learned behavior, right? I didn't get to have that, so now I'm going to give it to my kids, but it's not really great for anybody. And I think there is so many pieces of how people spend their money that is just deeply rooted in childhood, in how you're raised, in what you had and what you didn't have. I had a friend in college who grew up very, very wealthy. She then took a very low-paying job out of college, but never adjusted her spending habits. And I remember we were roommates standing outside and watching the repo come to pick her car up because she didn't make a car payment. She had the money to make the car payment, but paying bills was just never that important to her, and it was never stressed that bad things happen when you don't pay your bills. She got her car repossessed.
Yeah.
And it was totally this. She grew up with a very lackadaisical
Right, because money's always coming in. I never have to worry about it, and that's it, right?
Relationship.
Why would I have a problem? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think retirement is the other piece to that that's big, and I'm sure you see it on your side, is if you have parents that were very concerned about retirement and saved a lot of money, you probably are more conservative about your retirement than somebody who mom and dad got a pension, or it just wasn't a conversation that you ever had that you're like, oh, no, I'm 40 and now I need to think about that.
Yeah, and honestly, there's usually people on both ends of the spectrum, and sometimes I have to tell people, hey, you can actually spend more. You don't need to save this much, and for those people, it can be really challenging, and for the spenders, it's generally harder to rein in the spenders than it is to tell the savers to spend more. But it really goes in hand. And I think with a couple, you really want to look at everything totally too, because now you're together. So now you've got a different tax situation, right? So you got to look at that a little differently. You've got retirement accounts that were separate. They still stay separate registration wise, but now you've got to plan together your retirement, and you've got to look at those accounts and what you're saving. And maybe one person in the couple pays more into the Roth versus the other person. We got to figure like a lot of that stuff out. So you go from having this really kind of individualized plan, or at least thought process on your finances, to now bringing in a whole other person. And this is where having those conversations about your goals and having conversations about what do you guys really want out of life? When do you want to retire? And the other challenge I see often is those couples with different age gaps.
Yeah.
Because, okay, now you've got a person that's maybe 8 years older. Are you going to wait for the other person to retire? Are you retiring at the same age? Or is one person going to be retired for 8 years and be like, this guy's retired for 8 years and I still have to work?
Yeah, and they're home on the recliner, and you're like, get out of my house, go get a job. I see that on my end sometimes in mortgages, people downsizing where one person is still working away. And truthfully, let's be honest about it. Often it is a man who's older, the woman who's younger. That's very common in our society.
Yeah.
And so that's what I see a lot, where the man has retired, the woman still has 5 or 6 years left. The big reason why people keep working is insurance more than anything else, health insurance. And they're like still plugging along. And, their spouse is at home, watching golf on the TV. And that can be really stressful.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, this is all the stuff you want to really think about. I know it's tough to think, okay, I'm 25, 30 years old and we're getting married. I'm going to talk about you retiring 8 years before me. Cool. But it's all those things you want to get out ahead of time, because at the end of the day, going back to communication, all the communication is going to help your relationship in general, whether it's about money or about your desires or your values. Like those three things are, to me, are really important for a good relationship to be successful.
Absolutely. And I think, the last piece to that for me is also the how you're having these conversations from the beginning, right, are different than how your parents did. So this is the real millennial piece to it. It was very common in our parents' generation to get married in your early 20s, sometimes before you've even been established in a career. You do not have separate financial obligations at that point. All of your obligations are really coming together. So the advice that your parents are going to give you are based on people who never had separate finances. Their first car they bought together, their first house they bought together. My parents got married at like 21, so everything they did was together. Millennials are getting married later and later and later. By the time you're 30, I got married at 30. By the time you're 30, I'd already bought and sold 2 cars. My husband had bought and sold a house already. He'd had 2 cars. We both had our own student loans. We both had our own credit cards. So you really are merging a full life of finances together. So your parents' advice isn't necessarily going to help you.
Yeah, not always. And it goes back to that conversation you have to have, because figuring out like, how did you handle money, how did I handle money, what works, what's not working, and kind of blending, especially if it's conflicting ideologies, it's really tough. But it's got to be something that you have that conversation with. And one of the things that drives me nuts as a planner is when I have a meeting with just one person in a couple, because I'm like, well, I want to hear what the other person has to say, because it's important for them to be involved. And I always hate when it's either the man or the woman. Actually, surprisingly, most of my clients, the primary money person is actually the female relationship. Yeah, so I'm kind of the anomaly there. I don't know why I track that, but I see how important it is, because oftentimes, especially in meetings with clients, I'll see a husband saying something and the wife's going, oh my God, you get that look. And you're like, all right, how are you feeling about this? So I think sometimes having that financial therapy can really help get things out of there when they're maybe too afraid to say something directly to them. So sometimes even just bringing in a third person doesn't have to be necessarily a financial planner, but having someone have a third party view that's agnostic, that can kind of bring out what do you guys want in this relationship, financially at least, is really impactful.
Absolutely. And I think, as you brought up financial therapist, also don't be afraid of real therapy.
Yeah.
If you have some deep-rooted financial trauma, financial feelings, anxiety surrounding finances, which is very common for millennials. Again, rewind to episode 1. We graduated college in a financial crisis. We then got another financial crisis. We then got a pandemic into another financial crisis. Like, we got some feelings on finances. It's okay to talk to somebody about it. It's okay to work through those feelings, because if you don't, your money is going to be impacted in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very common stressor. Like, everyone's stressed about money.
Yeah. So go to therapy.
Yeah. All right. What you want to? Why don't we finish with some quick kind of tips for couples to think about? One of the things I would recommend is, obviously, if someone gets married, there's typically a name change. Not always, but there can be. So make sure all the documents are updated.
Are you talking about my debit card that still has my maiden name on it?
Yeah. Don't do that. Please change it.
I've been married for 11 years.
I know it's a pain because I honestly I feel for like all the women.
It's horrible. There should be a one-stop shop.
Yeah, there should be. Like I'm going to go to one place and I can bloop, change everything. But like we tried to roll over one of my old clients' 401ks and she still had her maiden name on it. So you got to make sure that's changed before you could roll it over.
My mortgage is in my maiden name too. Never changed that.
I would change it. Oh my gosh, change it, please. So all right, so don't learn from Kelly.
Nope. Change. If you're going to change it, just do it.
Yeah, so just make sure you're changing the names on everything. So change the beneficiaries, update.
That's a good one. Change the like my beneficiaries in my first job were my parents.
Yeah, often that's the case. Like mine was typically my brother. So when I got married, I had to make sure sorry, Brian, but Nicole's now my beneficiary. So you just want to make sure you're kind of reviewing those and updating those again. One of the other simple things, like you may with the bank accounts, you kind of mentioned like, haha, my husband doesn't have access to mine. And if you want that to be the case, that's fine. But one of the things I would recommend is you can change them to what's called a transfer on death account. Because if anything were to happen to you, that money would directly go to your spouse versus having to go through probate first, which would delay if they needed cash for the funeral or whatever kind of immediate medical needs or something like that. At least you have access to it at that point because normally you wouldn't. It would have to go through probate. That's one of the benefits of having a joint account is, you don't have to
don't
wait.
do what I'm doing. Don't do what I'm doing. Just have a joint.
Yeah, have a joint. I mean, if you want your own private account, you don't want them seeing what's going on, that's totally fine. Just make sure it's a transfer on death. That's the same thing that goes for an investment account that you may have started prior to the relationship. You can make that either a joint, or if you don't trust them, which hopefully you do if you're marrying that person. Once again, make it a transfer on death. So there's like a couple little things. I don't want to kill everyone off right up when they get married. But those are things you want to have in place that will, help ease some burdens later down the line.
Yeah, and I think my big advice is full financial transparency before you get engaged, before you go to buy a house. You should not be looking at your credit and talking about your income and your debts with your mortgage loan officer for the first time. You're going to talk to him.
No, don't do that.
Yeah, it shouldn't be for the first time. So print out. I really do recommend it. If you are talking about, even if it's like hey, we're talking about moving in together for the first time, like in an apartment. Okay, we can do that, but we have to sit down and go over finances. Make yourself some spreadsheets, print out all the credit card statements, print out all the student loan statements, lay it all out for everybody. Because before you make the step to move in and you maybe give up your independent living, your apartment, make sure that none of this stuff is a deal breaker for your spouse.
I mean, imagine buying a business and never doing any due diligence and knowing are there any debts in the company? What's the revenue of that company? I'll just buy it. It's fine. They look pretty. They have a cool product. I'm going to go buy it. Like that's not what you want to do with your personal finances. I think that would be crazy if you did that for a business.
And you would rather be embarrassed before you've made all these commitments to somebody else than be embarrassed after the fact when they find out.
Yeah.
And you really, truthfully, if you are married to somebody, it is very difficult to hide financial problems in the long run. It's going to come out some way, somehow. Somebody's going to find a statement. You're going to, again, go to buy something together and credit scores are going to come out.
Even renting, you're going to get credit scores.
Yeah, something's going to happen and you're going to have to fess up. So fess up early and often.
Yeah. And just talk about it. There's always a way out. I think that's one thing that people will kind of freak out and say, oh my God, I have so much debt or this happened. I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. If you confront it, you can actually attack the problem and make it go away eventually, because if you have a plan for it, you'll be able to alleviate that stress and alleviate that problem. But if you hide it, it's only going to get worse. It's only going to feel worse.
Absolutely. So joint accounts and go to therapy.
Joint accounts, therapy, kids in karate.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
All right. See you next time.
The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision.